Hello and welcome to this Infrastructure Victoria webinar. I'm Jonathan Spear, CEO of Infrastructure Victoria. And in today's webinar, we're going to be diving into looking at digital technology and infrastructure productivity. You've all been hearing about AI and machine learning and robotics and big data, I'm sure, in the work you've been doing, and it's all across the media. Today, what we're going to do is dive deeper into what it means for the infrastructure sector, and in particular, what some of the productivity driving and improving opportunities there are by more application of digital technology with our infrastructure. In doing that, I'm really pleased to be joined by a couple of fabulous panelists. We're going to have Kate Hardwick joining us from Arup and Lara Olsen from Southeast Water. Now, Kate worked with Infrastructure Victoria in developing this report, and they're going to help us as we break down and dive deeper into the findings of this report after I've given you an overview of it at the start of the webinar. Kate is an urban development specialist. She's got decades of experience across Australia, Asia, and Canada, and is really well placed to help lead us through understanding some of the detail of this report that we've developed. Lara Olsen is Managing Director of Southeast Water, so one of our water and sewage and waste management utility companies in the southeast of Melbourne. And Lara has excellent experience, not only in water, but in other utilities as well. Southeast Water has been one of the leaders in application of digital technologies in Victoria. And so really pleased to have both Kate and Lara join us. Now, we're going to have a presentation from me about this report to give you an overview, and there'll be a discussion then between Kate, Lara, and I around some of the detail of the report and some of the experiences in Victoria. But there's also an opportunity for you to ask your questions. And so you can see below the feed, there's the Slido screen. And so really we'd encourage you to put in your questions that you'd like to have us discuss, and we'll get to as many of those as possible in the latter half of this webinar. You can also vote up and down for people's questions if you'd like to really encourage the discussion on a particular area. So with that, before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which this webinar is being held. So given that it's a digital webinar, there'll be a number of lands we're holding it, but I'm coming to you from Infrastructure Victoria's offices in Melbourne. So we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and any who might be with us today. You're probably familiar with Infrastructure Victoria, but for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Infrastructure Victoria is the state independent infrastructure advisor. We give advice to the Victorian government and the Victorian Parliament, and we do that through a number of ways, through a 30-year infrastructure strategy, through independent advice to government, and through research that we undertake. And this work on digital technology and infrastructure productivity comes under that research arm of the work that we do. But importantly, it feeds into the development of the 30-year infrastructure strategy and some of the recommendations we're going to be making. So in some ways, this webinar is a little bit of a spoiler for what's coming up early next year when the 30 infrastructure strategy is updated and released for consultation in early 2025. Now, one of the important elements of the way we work is we are very open about our evidence base. And so what you'll be able to do is, after this webinar, dive onto our website and you can see the full report that we're going to be discussing. We hope that you find it useful because really it's designed to start to lead a conversation about the application of digital technology infrastructure in all sorts of sectors in Victoria, but hopefully in other jurisdictions as well. So let's start with some fundamentals. Why is Infrastructure Victoria looking at digital technology and its application? Well, we've got some challenges in Victoria, and Victoria is not alone on this front in terms of productivity growth, economic productivity growth, but also driving greater use of the infrastructure we already have, and promoting productivity in the manner in which we construct and operate our infrastructure. Digital technology has a real opportunity for us to improve our productivity. We've also got financial constraints. And again, that's something that many jurisdictions are facing. And in that context, making the most of the existing infrastructure we've got is becoming increasingly important, and digital technology is one of the ways we can do that. There's also the importance of economic growth and innovation across our economy. And Australia has relatively low and slow rates of technological innovation. And what we can see through this report is that there are opportunities not just for government infrastructure, but for the providers of services and construction and innovation across the broader economy. At the same time, Victoria is growing fast. Our infrastructure needs are growing. And so digital technology is one of the ways in which we can make sure that we are planning for, delivering, and meeting the growing infrastructure needs of our population. And at the same time, our climate is changing. So we're increasingly in the world of infrastructure, focusing on how can we make our infrastructure more resilient, but also reduce the levels of carbon in the construction and operation of our infrastructure. In all of these challenges, digital technology has a part to play. It's not the sole panacea for all of these challenges, but as this work pulls out, it certainly gives us some big opportunities that we think are unexploited in Victoria. Having said that, there's some great examples, which we're going to be talking about in Victoria and around the world, that are leading indicators about what we can achieve with greater application of digital technology. So when you dive into the report, which I'm sure you'll want to do after this webinar, it'll be irresistible, I know. What you'll see is the way we've undertaken this work is firstly a horizon scan across all sorts of digital technologies. And I don't know about you, but I certainly can find it confusing, the number of technologies that are out there and the way in which they interact with each other. So what we initially wanted to do is to hone in on, of all those technologies we hear about, what are the ones that are most promising as priorities for us to apply to drive productivity? And so we assessed and prioritized these technologies. And in doing that, what we really wanted to do is make sure that there were current existing technologies, not perhaps far future technologies that are a glimmer in people's eye or that are in early stages of development, but technologies that are proven and being applied in some places, either in Victoria or in other jurisdictions, that could be more widely deployed in Victoria over the next 5 years or so. So that was a really important filter that we applied in prioritising the technology. Then what we did is did a measurement and evaluation of the extent to which application of these technologies would bring benefits in particular sectors or applications of Victorian infrastructure. Now, it's not a full cost benefit analysis, but what we were able to do is bring some quantification of the benefits of applying these technologies to existing or planned infrastructure in Victoria in the coming years. And so what that led us to is 5 technologies that we focused on. So machine learning coupled with artificial intelligence, robotics, advanced imaging, advanced data analytics, and geospatial technologies. Now, later in this webinar, we're going to be diving into better understanding each of those. But what we did in each of those technologies is then we took a test case, a potential application of how that technology could be applied in Victoria. So, for example, in relation to machine learning and artificial intelligence, we looked about its application in the construction and early design of schools and kindergartens, of which we have a very large current and future pipeline in Victoria. And what we found is that based off evidence from other examples of the application of that technology to similar projects overseas, we could be saving around $20 million a year on our significant school and kindergarten pipeline. And so when you then calculate that out over coming decades, that really does end up in the hundreds of millions of dollars of potential benefits. Now, this doesn't all come for free, though. So the other thing we did in relation to this example and the other examples is we looked at, well, how expensive is this technology to deploy, and what are some of the barriers that we're going to need to overcome in realising this investment? So we found that using the same test case of machine learning and AI in schools and kindergartens, that its cost level was moderate. The primary costs and challenges are around incremental development, software licensing, and importantly, software upskilling. In contrast, when we looked at application of robotics in the water sector for inspection and maintenance, we found that might have, it's very significant savings, around $140 million a year in Victoria, but its costs are relatively high as well, because you need large investments in development and capital and specialist workforce skills. So they're the sort of case studies that you see then as you go through this report, as we've picked some particular examples. Now, what I want to emphasise, of course, is that there are some really great examples in Victoria where we're already applying some of these technologies. And we're going to drill into some of those shortly, particularly Lara's got some great examples of those. What we think there's a really big opportunity for is greater application of them more widely across more of our infrastructure sectors. So what is to be done then? Our draft recommendations to the Victorian government that will be in the next issue of our infrastructure strategy will be calling for greater use of digital technologies to better design, build and maintain government infrastructure. We're suggesting that be done through greater piloting of these digital technologies on government infrastructure projects. In particular, use of building information modelling on major infrastructure and housing projects. We'll come back to what building information modelling is later in the webinar. And greater use of digital technologies in projects through government procurement. So a government being much more deliberate about when we set up procurement, asking for and expecting digital technologies to be part of the design, construction, delivery, and ongoing operation of our infrastructure. If we do that, not only will it help with government infrastructure, but it'll probably help businesses in Victoria to have the confidence to invest in the skills and digital capabilities they need to grow as well. So as I said, that's a bit of a spoiler for the 2025 version of Victoria's infrastructure strategy. Everyone's going to get to have their say on that when we release a draft of that in early 25. So with that, I think it's time to turn to discussion with our panel. And as I said earlier, please feel free to keep your questions coming in the Slido, and we'll get to those too. But Kate, let's start with you. You and your team collaborated with Infrastructure Victoria in the development of this report. What were some of the key takeaways that you think we should really be drawing from this work?
Thanks, Jonathan. And firstly, I'd just love to say we had such a great time working with the Infrastructure Victoria team. So thank you very much for inviting us into that. I think there's probably a couple of things that were the most interesting. The first is of the rate of change and the momentum that's gathering behind these sorts of things. Since our report, particularly related to the use cases, the national government's come out with the robotics strategy. It's citing, $600 billion a year in productivity benefits. We've got AI adopt centres. The federal government's investing in SMEs for AI adoption. And we're also seeing, private sector get behind it as well, with Google sort of looking at investing $19 million in a network of 52 satellites for better bushfire detection. So I think that there's incredible, it sort of validates, I guess, the opportunities that we identified in the report, particularly the high potential ones. And it's really exciting to see both government and private sector getting behind and doing those things, making those investments, doing the work. I think probably the second part of it is the number of places in which we could lift productivity. We designed the analysis to look at, the particular use cases, and it was really designed not so much for precision, but to really look at, how and where benefits are being realized. And I think what was really interesting out of that analysis is that, it's quite incremental. There's lots of different touch points. And it's not just, one technology, one big burst of technology. It's when you layer on the technologies that these kind of benefits can be realized, and then they sort of compound on each other. So really, it's less about doing, the big showy stuff. And it's really focusing, I guess, on the small things that we can do well to get that sort of really broad adoption through workforce, through practices, and through our supply chains.
Thanks, Kate. And so that emphasis then on incrementally applying things, not necessarily having to be a big bang, but piloting and deploying the new technologies and learning as we go as part of the findings of the report. Was there anything that you found that was unexpected when the team was working their way through delving into the world of digital technology and infrastructure productivity?
I don't think it was so much unexpected, but just the pockets of, excellence that are happening through the sector. There are lots of different ways that people are, exploring this topic. And I think the unexpected element was that, we haven't sort of progressed in a more kind of integrated conversation about it, that there is I said, pockets of excellence that are happening throughout the sector. And really the opportunity then from this report is that sort of coming together and looking at, what the cross opportunities are.
Yes, well, speaking of pockets of excellence, the water sector is one of those ones that stands out actually, which is one of the reasons that we've got Lara with us today, because of course Southeast Water has been embracing digital technology to improve productivity, and actually there's quite innovative approaches being taken across other elements of the water sector as well. So welcome again, Lara. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you share with us a bit about the journey that Southeast Water has been on in embracing digital technology to improve productivity?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jonathan, for having me. Maybe before I go into the journey, just a quick snapshot for those that don't know Southeast Water. So we provide drinking water, recycled water, and sewage and waste services to about 1.8 million people in the southeast of Melbourne. So we go from South Bank to Portsea and about 30 kilometres out past Pakenham. And as you say, Jonathan, I think I joined just over 4 years ago and was really fortunate to join an organisation that has been really focused on innovation for a long time, and also a sector that's been focused on it as well, and particularly now focused on digital innovation. I do think it's important. It's something that we've done and others to make sure that any innovation is really about delivering on your strategy and purpose. And so for us at Southeast Water, our purpose is healthy water for life. And for us, that for life means for the generations to come, because our assets often have very long design lives and lifetimes, 50 years, 100 years more. That for life is also about our customers and the lifestyles that they lead. So to make sure that they've got the sporting grounds that they can play on, to make sure that there's the water for the jobs that they might do and the water in their homes. And also that for life is for the environment, so the flora and fauna around us. And so a number of the digital technologies that I'm going to talk about absolutely increase our productivity. Not all of it is measured in terms of dollar value, but sometimes in terms of increased safety that our employees experience, or better outcomes for our customers or for the environment. In terms of the journey and delivering on that sort of strategy and purpose through digital technologies, there's a couple of examples that I think really demonstrate this. The first is around our digital meter program. So currently for our customers on analog meters, the way that we find a leak is that they see water spilling in their street and phone us up. Or we also have people, we've got 27,000 kilometres of pipes in that network, both water and sewage. We have actually people that walk along that network with listening devices to see if they can hear a change that might be indicative of a burst or a leak about to happen. And that's really not a good customer experience, obviously, to potentially have a leak that's going to cost you a lot more money, get a bill in 3 months' time to find that you've got that leak when you could have done something earlier. So we are about 100,000 of our digital meters that have been rolled out, and we'll be rolling out our full network across the next 5 years. And that's been a fantastic experience for our people and our customers. So last financial year, we saved our customers just under $3 million, so $2.9 million, because we were able to tell them that they had a leak before waiting for the next bill. So on average, that is $67 off the next quarterly bill for our small leaks and $780 for the large leaks. We also importantly saved 680 megalitres of water by detecting those leaks on the customer side early. And although we've had 2 quite rainy years recently and our water storages across Melbourne are high, those that are old enough like me to remember the millennial drought will know that those storages can drop relatively quickly, including by about 20 to 25% a year. And so really important for us across all of our customers and networks to save that water. Maybe one further exciting part about that was within our digital meters, we've actually got a vibration sensor that was invented here at South East Water that measures the leaks back into our network. So it's not just on the customer side that we have leaks, but on our network side as well. And the exciting part about that is we're now using that data to try and predict when we might see small vibrations before they become a major burst or a leak into the road. And ideally, by doing that, we can do preventative maintenance. And that means that my teams aren't out there at night when they might have a leak and have to fix it. It means that customers aren't impacted from a traffic perspective, and we can inform them before those works need to happen and be more productive in doing that. Ideally, we'd love to get to the stage where we can batch those leaks. So I think you can see from that both that it is getting implemented, but also that there's multiple benefits from a safety perspective, from a customer perspective, and from an environment perspective too.
Yeah, there's a really great package of benefits there, isn't there, Lara, for both for South East Water, but also for customers. I imagine this is not always straightforward, though, in terms of South East Water, both choosing to take the plunge in investing in digital technology and taking both the board and the organisation and customers on the journey to do something a bit different. Tell us a bit about that journey of making that decision to invest in new digital technologies, and what were some of the challenges, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, I think that is critical to an innovation culture. We all know it's easy to celebrate when things go right, but I think it's having the support from the board and the leadership team and the full team when things go wrong. Obviously, that never excuses negligence, but it is really important when you're innovating that if things don't quite go to plan, that isn't reacted to in a way that frightens people. I think we're all much more aware of safety now and psychological safety, which applies not only just to everyday activities, but definitely to innovation as well. I think we are fortunate enough and very fortunate that we have had that support from the board and the organisation throughout the journey, because there's definitely been bumps in the road in terms of when technology hasn't quite worked as planned, and we've had to communicate to partners or to customers about what's happened and how we've needed to make that change. I think the great part about for the digital meter rollout in particular is that customers have really liked it because we were able to tell them what the benefit was to them straight away. So we are able to tell them about the leak savings and how much money and water is being saved. And so we've had a really low opt-out rate of digital water meters because customers understand the benefit to them.
Yeah, and that's a great lesson, isn't it, that we could apply across other sectors and other technologies in terms of communicating customer benefits and user benefits, in addition to the very considerable savings that we see in application of digital technologies. Kate, turning back to you, but staying in the water sector, one of the case studies that the report looks at is the use of robotics in the water sector. Tell us a bit more about that example in the report and what were some of the key benefits, but also perhaps some of the challenges in deploying robotics into infrastructure. And I think we used the example, didn't we, of inspection robots in Sydney, didn't we?
I think one of the things about, robotics or robots in particular lend themselves in water in particular because they are, huge networks, they're underground, they're difficult to access. But one of the challenges that we have is that, I think Lara's example kind of demonstrates that, is that actually getting in there with robots, they really need to be supplemented, because at the moment they really need a lot of line of sight. So, traditional ones is, a camera being pushed down a cable. And so we're really looking for, those advances in, optical sensing, magnetic sensing, acoustic sensing, to really then be able to make sure to make these robots better fit for purpose. I think the benefits that we talked about, in the report, and what Lara is sort of talking to, is that there's a huge opportunity in terms of proactive maintenance, so that you can, extend the life of the asset, you can reduce water leakage, which, those sort of big examples that Lara talked about are certainly a problem. But when you look actually in rural water as well, slow leaks over time, non-revenue water, is a real cost to the state. And then there's also, improved maintenance costs and savings to be made there. So there's lots of potential for these sort of assets. And in doing that also too, if you're prolonging the life of these subterranean assets, there's the carbon savings that can be made because you don't have to replace them so much. That being said, so there's lots of upside. The challenges being that there's not a lot of off-the-shelf products here in Australia. We don't have the size of the market, and that's a real challenge. And then there's the other elements around the other technologies that are required to really amplify the benefits of the robots. That's picked up in the National Robot Strategy that talks about, the need for that acoustic or magnetic kind of imaging to supplement the robots. But in particular, one of the biggest challenges is workforce adoption. There's a bit of a reluctance in Australia generally to work alongside robots. Not the same in other advanced economies, but that's a particular challenge. So I think, the opportunity and the benefit is really there. There are some of the things, and when we get to the conversation about enablers, that, really are required to help unlock it and to be able to sort of implement these things at scale.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. One of the other technologies that the report looks at is building information modelling, where we create 3D models of buildings, and we use advanced data analytics to do that. And that then allows opportunities both in design and construction and operation of new buildings, and many of which include infrastructure, and particularly some social infrastructure. The examples we looked at in the report was social housing, and it sort of quantifies the benefits of using those 3D models throughout that process, so that everyone's working on the same design at the same time, including any changes, and also it sort of identifies some of the areas or conflicts that could occur in design and construction. And some of the overseas examples showed savings through avoidance of those costs of around 7%. That's really big when you apply it across a multi-billion-dollar program like the social housing program we have in Victoria. Kate, can you tell us a little bit more about, how does building information modelling work? How does it in practice support the design and construction of infrastructure and get us some of those benefits?
Yeah. So the BIM, I think, is, it's important to recognise that it is a sort of a real process. It's an end-to-end. It sort of, helps you from a blank sheet of paper to the actual operation and maintenance of the asset. It's widely available at the moment, but not really adopted because these models are usually big and complex. And very often, you might have them specified in a procurement process for design, but then is not handed through, and there's results in double handling. And so where we found in the report of the benefit of 7%, and that's probably, quite conservative, that's, the ability for to be able to optioneer your design, to be able to, construct the building more efficiently, and then, being able to operate the building more efficiently. So that 7% comes from an improved design and construction process. And it also means that you can hold aside a small amount in contingency. So that sort of 7% is quite narrowly focused just to that sort of design phase. And obviously the opportunities are much broader. We did look at adopting, extrapolating that out over the entire economy. And so adopting drawingless construction, I think we had reduced delivery costs for homes in the order of $1.8 billion each year. So that's quite a significant saving just at one part of the process. And we found that, as I said, that's quite a conservative number. I think one of the examples in the report talks about road projects in Norway, where they've been able to reduce cost overruns in project delivery from, sort of an average of 19% to 5%. And, when you're talking about huge investments over a long piece of, over a long area, that's quite a saving.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So there's some really big opportunities that we can apply across lots of components of the infrastructure sector. And as you said, building information modeling is a well-proven technology that if we adopt it at scale and more consistently, we could really be yielding some really great savings and efficiencies. Lara, turning to you, be really interested in your perspective on potential applications or current applications of building information modeling in the water sector.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, Kate. And we are seeing it already in the sector. So the other side, from what I talked about before, is the waste side of our organisation. So we treat about 130 billion litres of waste, either at one of our 8 treatment plants across the network or at Melbourne Water's large treatment plants. And we have used the building information modelling and 3D models for our treatment plants. And we recently saw a really good example of what Kate just described, where we had an aeration system being upgraded at one of our treatment plants. We were able to use that 3D model for us to better understand the risks and what we were expecting when we put it out for procurement. We were able to provide that to the people and the organisations applying. And so what we did see then is a better understanding of what we were looking for, reduced cost and reduced contingency, as Kate spoke about, because the risks are clearer. And then also importantly on site, it is better from a safety perspective because everyone is very, very clear in terms of where the assets are and what that looks like. And so we do see those benefits across all parts of that value chain. And now really starting to think about, okay, great, we've got our treatment plants. It would be really wonderful to have this from a network perspective and other perspectives as well, so that we're really clear on what those assets are and that we can manage them better over time in conjunction with partners or others who work on our assets too.
Yeah, thanks, Lara. So that's a really great practical example. And given the size of the water sector alone, there's some big opportunities there. Kate, turning now to some other elements of the report, we also looked at AI-enhanced geospatial hazard management opportunities where we can prepare and detect and respond to emergencies more rapidly. And as well as some of these opportunities, we've been talking about better maintaining and adapting our infrastructure, including through digital infrastructure. It'd be great to hear from you, Kate, about some examples where digital technologies can be applied to boost resilience of infrastructure in the face of climate change, as well as helping to respond to extreme weather events.
Yeah, I think the geospatial case study was probably one of my favorites because it actually, Australia now has sovereign satellite capability, which we haven't had in the past. And so this is an opportunity, is one that's really ripe. to be maximised. So in terms of the way that that sort of geospatial information can be used in terms of resilience, so one of the big drivers of this project was climate change, and flooding and bushfire risk we know is a huge impact on our economy. So I guess it's really in multiple touch points, how it can be beneficial and feed us some really important information. I guess the first stage is, alerting you to risk. So there's, moisture content in vegetation and soil and those sorts of things that might give you an early warning about the potential risk of bushfire. And then there's the element of the early warning system. So I think that the Google investment in the GPS and the satellites will mean that they can detect fires of in 5 meters. If that can reduce your response time, that has a significant impact or a significant benefit to those kind of at-risk communities. And then the ability to then track smoke or rising floodwaters and those sorts of things becomes really important, that live information. In terms of asset management, the digital technologies alongside the GPS can then make sure that the other infrastructures that we rely on are fit for purpose, ready to go, our roads and our other infrastructures that are required in those times of emergency management. We've got the better telecommunications, so more effective, more targeted information to those communities so that you can have a more effective response. And then ultimately coordination with the emergency management services. So being able to utilize roads and other services like that to be able to better coordinate emergency vehicles and evacuations and other kind of emergency management responses.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So those applications, both in preparing for and responding to emergencies and making infrastructure more resilient, are of course becoming increasingly pressing. And for those of you who haven't seen Infrastructure Victoria's report on weathering the storm around adapting our infrastructure for climate change, highly recommend you check that out. But turning back to water, Lara, I know that sustainability and preparing for climate change, of course, are core things that all water corporations are really focused on and have got some targets on too. Tell us a bit about how the digital transformation that Southeast Water has been going through relates to achievement of some of those sustainability and resilience objectives that you've got.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So like many of the other water corporations, we are aiming to be a net zero by 2030 and hoping currently to hit that by 2028. And also at the same time are definitely seeing increased impacts from climate change. So certainly over the last year, we had far more incidents than we've ever had before of storms, which many people on this webinar will have experienced. Also really heavy rains. Thankfully, we didn't have fires, but certainly some of the colleagues in the water sector did. And I think digital technologies just provide some of that resilience at a simple level and then a more detailed level. Maybe some of the simple examples at first. One for us is in summer over the Mornington Peninsula, we get a lot more people down than we normally get. And so for us, just part of that resilience is not necessarily an incident, but making sure that our pump stations are still working from a sewage perspective when we've got that increased load. And so something simple like just having the pump stations that are most at risk on a single page for our operators means that they can see straight away the health of our network and identify if they need to change any of the flows across our network. I think that's the other thing that digital technology has done. Our operators are able to operate and change some of those flows remotely. So we don't need to now have a travel time for someone to attend a particular pump station or part of our network to change those flows. They can do that remotely and from wherever they happen to be based at the time, allowing us to manage the network as the incidents or the weather might change. That's particularly important because we did do a range of scenarios for different climate activities, and certainly one for us is bushfire, which obviously would have a big impact on our customers and also the environment, but also potentially our ability for our people to move depending on where they live and if they're impacted by the bushfire as well. So by having these digital technologies allows us to operate the network and provide a resilience in terms of our people don't need to get into the office in Frankston to be able to operate that and start changing the network to reflect what's happening climatically. The one thing I will say, though, too, I think a recent lesson for us, or maybe a reinforcement, is we often think about building bricks and mortar technology and infrastructure, that we need to look at its design for climate. And I think we've also definitely seen that we also need to make sure that our digital assets and digital infrastructure is built for the climates that we're seeing. So most of our network, for our sewer network, for instance, is gravity, and that's probably what most people experience. But certainly in some parts of our network where there's a lot of hills or the topography doesn't support it, we use a pressure sewer system. In that case, people have got a pod in their back garden with a controller on it that pumps at certain times into our system. What we discovered recently in the storms in February, although we're not a regional network, was that parts of our customer network didn't have power for more than 6 days. Previously, we'd only had a battery life in those pressure sewer pods for 2 days. So we've now redesigned that to be 7 days so that we can keep sending the signals to it and it can keep operating through different climatic situations. And I think that's just reinforced for us that from a climate perspective, it's not just our current infrastructure, but also our future infrastructure that needs to be designed with a different resilience.
Thanks, Lara. Yes, so there's some really practical opportunities there for digital technology to be applied for resilience of infrastructure and continue to have it operate. And then that's on top, of course, of all the benefits that we've been talking about earlier to customers and to users of infrastructure and the custodians and operators of infrastructure. So given all of those benefits, the key question, and it relates to many of the great questions that have been coming through on the Slido, is why aren't we doing it more? Why aren't we deploying more digital technology more rapidly in more applications? So, of course, that's something we looked at in the report, didn't we, Kate? So I'll let you perhaps start on this. What are some of the biggest barriers that we turned up in this work, and what at least are some of the leading ideas around how we address those barriers?
Yeah, and that was obviously a huge part of the work that we were looking into. And I think, for the most part, as I said, this is complicated. We have incrementally been, our professional lives are much more sort of digitally enabled, and the technology is always evolving. So I think there's this constant need to be incrementally pushing forward. And I think a lot of the challenges come from, we fall into this like innovation valley of death. There's so much stuff out there that we need to be aware of. And then, how do we, the interdependencies between those technologies are, very, very apparent. And so you get into this sort of, inertia about, how that you can then overcome all of these things when it seems to be multivariate and have lots of different elements and challenges. I think probably the most comforting thing I took out of doing the work is that, it's not sexy, but doing the boring stuff really, really well. This doesn't need, huge, it doesn't need huge investment, but it doesn't need, a focus on the really big things. We don't need to sort of get a lot of anxiety about, path dependency for the future. It really is focusing on those, that sort of consistent adoption across all of the technologies and introducing them into our work practices and our industries and our supply chains in a sort of very consistent way. So that's been, I guess, some of the blockers that we found. But you talk to individual agencies and the work that was done through the departments. There's quite specific challenges that all sort of come back to a consistent number of elements, and it's something for the government to focus on.
Thanks, Kate. And of course, part of the way you start to kind of eat that elephant is to do pilots on specific challenges that we've got in particular sectors and particular bits of infrastructure to learn and iterate and do that. And of course, the other thing that the report rules out is some of the underpinning things you need to have in terms of, good cybersecurity, appropriate regulation, incremental upgrade of workforce capacity and understanding as well. I mean, it'd be great now to turn to you, Lara, about what some of your lessons are about, some of the challenges. And one of the things I'd love to hear from you about, of course, is in applying new digital technologies, you're often working with private sector providers. How are you engaging with those providers in a way that's competitive in terms of your procurement, and also sort of manages some of the risks that are involved in deploying this new technology over time? It's certainly one of the questions that's come through from our audience.
Yeah, thank you. And I think in terms of the barriers that we do see, and I sort of touched on it earlier, I think the first is having the sort of culture and leadership and support, which is within an organisation, but also across an ecosystem that does support innovation. And so it's not just the organisation, but making sure from the regulator's point of view that they're also supportive of innovation, and more broadly the different stakeholders, particularly as a government entity, that there is that support. And again, we hold ourselves to a high standard of doing it, but understanding that not all innovation goes to plan straight away. And I think the other part about it is recognising where you are in the value chain. So for us, we do provide an essential service, and I think making sure that our water retains its water quality is incredibly important in terms of the health outcomes of our customers, and also ensuring that we've got customer trust. And so when we look at some of these different innovations, it's different if it's something that is involved in water quality, like say robotics might be, compared if it's to a part of our network that doesn't have or pose the same risks to water quality. And having private partners that understand that is really important, because we can take different risks and different levels of risks in different parts of our operations. We certainly do have active partnerships, particularly with universities as well, and private sectors, and also with a range of the other water corporations, all working together to trial different things in small pilots, as you touched on, Jonathan. I think that's been a great way to demonstrate what is possible, to work out some of those risks on a small scale and try and solve for them. And certainly for us to get the business case up for our digital meter investment, we did a range of pilots to prove out some of the benefits, to prove that we could manage the risks. And that was, I think, really important in terms of getting that business case approved.
Yeah, and Lara, staying with you, when you then do a pilot like that, what are some of the ways in which you're able to manage dissemination and sharing of the lessons of that across the industry, but also appropriately treat with some of the intellectual property, of course, that might be created either by South East Water or by some of your commercial or university partners? How does that play out in practice?
Yeah, I mean, the great part about the water sector is it's a very collegiate and collaborative sector. It's one of the things I've really loved about it, in terms of that sharing of both what works and what hasn't worked. And I think that is how we keep getting better and better as a sector. So I think in terms of that, a lot of those initial trials that we did was shared with the other water corporations, as they've shared their trials and projects with us as well. And a lot of that isn't necessarily IP, but much more related to things like, what was the customer acceptance rate? How did we get that information right to customers? How has our workforce responded? What is the technology that's worked well? What's the communications technology that's worked well? So none of that is necessarily IP, but more around sharing what's worked from a water perspective. And so we haven't really, I suppose, run into any IP issues there. We also do have, though, a unregulated subsidiary at South East Water that does commercialise some of our technology. And so that vibration sensor that I mentioned before, that's in our digital meters, that has been licensed to an international tier 1 metering company. And so that sensor now is in other meters and sensors across the world. And in that way, I suppose it's a great way to actually get reward for some of the IP that has been formed here in Victoria.
Absolutely, it is. And, congratulations on that. Great to see that being scaled up and shared more broadly. I would say one of the things that struck me is we've been talking to stakeholders and media about this work, has been feedback about people sometimes being concerned about impact of new digital technology on jobs. And, sometimes this is akin to, are the robots all going to come and take our jobs? Kate, I think you might have some views on this. I'm sure you've probably had similar feedback as well. Are the robots coming to take our jobs? And if not, what's actually the way things are likely to play out?
Thank you. That definitely something that comes up time and time again. We look at, and this is an evolving conversation. Will technologies take our jobs? The adoption of digital technologies take our jobs? And look, the answer is yes, it will, but whether that is negative or positive is going to be how we respond to it. I think, it's important that whether it's, we recognize industry-wide and, economy-wide that there are skill shortages. And that sort of came up in the intergenerational report and the Productivity Commission's report and the employment white paper. So we have this sort of skill shortage. And digital technologies have a real role to play in terms of being able to bridge that gap. There's some interesting research out of Germany and other places. It's not conclusive, but it really does say, as I said, the way, if it is a benefit for your workforce, is how you respond to it. And so, the countries and the economies that have spent the time sort of upskilling workforce, really being proactive in terms of building out industry capability and managing and supporting the workforce, have done much better than others. I'm based in Singapore, and for a long time, since the 80s, they've had a sustainable lifelong learning kind of funding mechanism. And now they're really focusing on, AI for AI skills development in over 40s. So you can get 4,000 Singapore dollars to be able to go and do a postgraduate diploma, and that's widely available in AI. So, and there's lots of examples of where, the industries are being supported to be more digitally literate, that, new jobs and more, and better take up of employment opportunities. One of the things that we looked at was the GPR, the ground penetrating radar. And at the moment, the technology that we looked at is this sort of multi-sensor array. It can, scan at multiple levels. But at the moment, the data processing element of it is very specialized and can be only done by, people with a PhD. As machine learning and AI then supplement our ability to understand the outputs of that technology, that will mean that, programmers and technicians are able to use this, and then, there's a whole suite of employment opportunities that are created. So I really think, yes, it will have an impact on jobs. We have a need to be able to supplement the workforce and be able to build out those skills. So as much as it's, can be seen as a threat, there is an enormous challenge, an enormous opportunity for Australia and Victoria.
Thanks, Kate. And Lara, turning to you, I'd be really interested to hear what your experience has been with your workforce at South East Water. How has deployment of technologies like AI or robotics or some of those other digital technologies been perceived by the workforce, and how's that playing out in practice?
Yeah, I think, and we touched on it before, it's really important in these cases to talk about what the benefit is to either the customer or, in this case, our people. And in a number of examples, that benefit is really clear. So for the digital meter example, it does mean that we don't have people doing meter reads anymore. And that means that they're not coming across dangerous dogs anymore, which used to be a real safety concern for us as well. We've got, and as Kate touched on, a growing network. We've got some really parts of our network, Casey and Cardinia, that are really booming in terms of additional houses and us providing water and sewage to them, as well as infill across the city too. And so we need more people to be able to support that network. And so digital technologies has really helped us change some of those jobs so that our people can be focused on less repetitive tasks and more focused on that judgment, and also to do it in a safer way. And that's true for us of robotics as well. So we have used robotics for the inspection of some of our water tanks. That took a lot of careful planning because we need to make sure that they are appropriate from a water quality perspective. But it means that we don't have a diver in that case going into that tank. So again, speaking to the workforce about what this can mean for them, I think is really important.
Well, I've got to say, having been to some water treatment plants and seen what some of the people have to dive in there, I have a lot of sympathy for opportunities to avoid diving in some of those conditions. Now, I hope those of you who are watching us as this webinar progresses are enjoying it. You will see beneath the feed an opportunity to take part in a poll. We would love to hear from you about what you think of this webinar, and any feedback or opportunities for improvement. We really welcome. So do feel free to fill that in as we have the last sort of few minutes of this webinar. And in doing those last few minutes, I think one of the things that would be great to touch on is leadership. And Lara, obviously, there's been an important piece around leadership from your board and your executive in identifying the opportunities for application of digital technology and then making those investments and going on that journey. Can you reflect with us, any lessons you might draw either from your time at South East Water or your broader experiences too around, some of the top leadership tips in identifying and implementing digital technologies in infrastructure?
I think there's a couple in there. I think the one that you've touched on, Jonathan, around support and having support up and down the organisation and across the broader ecosystem is just key. I absolutely think that's fundamental to getting innovative results and innovations happening. It doesn't matter how much capital you've got, if it's not safe to innovate, then you'll find that it just grinds to a halt through multiple different methods. I think the other thing that I've really learnt, and from one of my previous experiences where previously I did work at Tesla in terms of how they thought about digital assets. And I think prior to that, I had always thought that from day one, an asset just degrades. And I think the exciting part about digital assets and our ability to do over-the-air firmware updates is that there is no reason that an asset now needs to just keep getting worse and worse. In fact, over time, it can get better and better. And ideally, day one is the worst that an asset ever is. And over time, it will just keep improving. And I think thinking what digital assets can be and completely changing our thought process around assets is really exciting for all infrastructure sectors.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Lara, because of course, asset management is something that there is sort of variable practices in across different asset classes. And thinking about the way in which digital can help us with that is certainly a new way of approaching it. How about from your perspective, Kate, from this work and what you've seen internationally, what are some of the top tips you would have for leadership in driving more adoption of digital technologies in infrastructure?
I think it probably comes back to, we talked a lot about, the workforce development and the tools and informed procurement, and I'm delighted to see the ways in which the recommendations for the report are being picked up because, creating safe spaces for technologies to be, understood before broader deployment with case studies and those other things are really important. I think probably the industry readiness component, our report looks at, we need broad adoption across, and industry adoption can't be sort of slowed down by the slowest mover. So really being able to support, I think Lara touched on the need for ecosystem engagement, so that as said, all of your operators and your suppliers and the whole ecosystem is engaged and sort of elevating and adopting these technologies. I think, leadership, not just from government, but also from industry bodies. I think, where we've seen there are centers of excellence, you see, particularly around robotics, you see much higher take up of robotics in the construction sector, for example. So that leadership coming not just from government or from CEOs, but also from the industry bodies that really have a role in then supporting the entire ecosystem to make sure that the adoption is sort of rolling out and benefiting everyone.
Right, thank you, Kate. Some great tips there and very complementary to those that Lara has suggested as well. What this report does, of course, is draw out, some of those opportunities for leadership, some of the ways in which we can overcome some of the barriers that we're identifying to unlock some of these really big potential productivity benefits, but also has been touched on through the conversation, benefits to customers, benefits to government, benefits to operators. And so that's one of the reasons why we were very keen to do this work and publish this report, which is now available for everybody to use. It is but the tip of the iceberg because, of course, what you've seen is some great examples of where digital technologies are being applied in infrastructure, both in Victoria and across the world. And we hope that identifying these 5 technologies in the report as real opportunities to drive productivity of infrastructure is something that can give a degree of focus to our efforts. Because there is a real opportunity for digital technologies to enable us to be able to design and build and maintain government infrastructure. And as we talked about through the webinar, and we've had some great examples of piloting of those digital technologies and then scaling them up, particularly some of those examples that Lara's taken us through. So we recommend we'd be doing more of that in Victoria. And that one of the ones we really need to be scaling up is building information modelling, which has really big opportunities across our major infrastructure, but also some of our major housing projects as well that we're embarking upon in Victoria. And one of the best ways that the Victorian government can engender greater confidence and capability is by us promoting digital technologies through the way we do our government procurement. And that's likely to be a really practical step to give businesses the confidence to invest in the digital capabilities that they need to grow. So I'd really like to thank all of you for joining us today and for your questions that have really drawn out some of the elements of this that are most important. But of course, big thank you to Kate and Lara for joining us as well. Kate, thank you to you and your team for your collaboration with IV in doing this work. And Lara, it's been so important to hear the experiences that you've had from both the leadership and then the practical application level of digital technologies in South East Water and indeed across the broader water sector. So I hope that's an example that we can take and continue to build in the water sector, but across other sectors of Victorian infrastructure as well. As I said, this report is available on the Infrastructure Victoria website right now. Do yourself a favour and check it out, and really encourage you to think about how you can apply it in your industry, in your sector, in your day-to-day work. And please stay tuned for more Infrastructure Victoria webinars. We're going to have some coming up in the next few months. So if you're not on our mailing list, please join up. And really looking forward to releasing the next issue of Victoria's 30-year infrastructure strategy early next year. We'd love to hear from you about what you think about that before we finalise it for tabling in Parliament later next year. Thanks very much for joining us today. Hope you have a great rest of the day and that this report is of use to you and your organisation. Thank you and goodbye.